So this is the third part of a video series about getting started homeschooling. And this part is going to focus on the law in Pennsylvania for homeschoolers. So if you're from Pennsylvania or you're thinking about moving to Pennsylvania, hopefully this will help you to get a little bit of information about how to get started. Now, I am not a lawyer. My background is elementary education, library science, tutoring with Orton Gillingham, children who are dyslexic. So I am not an authority on law. I will refer you to the Homeschool Legal Defense Association if you have questions about the law, or to just read the law yourself. But I will give you some information, as I understand it, about how to get started in homeschooling and following the Pennsylvania law. So, my name is Barb Bideman, in case you haven't seen the other two videos, and I homeschooled my children all the way through for 17 years. We've been in Pennsylvania the entire time. So my kids never went to public school or private school, and we actually followed what's called the private tutoring provision, which is a little bit different, and I will touch on that. It's something that you can use if you have Pennsylvania teaching certification. I also do homeschool evaluations. I've been doing homeschool evaluations for the past 18 years, and so I have a lot of familiarity with the law from that. So even though I didn't actually use the homeschool law, I've spoken on the homeschool law many, many times, and I've worked with the homeschool law as an evaluator as well. So let me share a little bit about how to get started in Pennsylvania following the Pennsylvania homeschool law. So there are some things that you need to know related to what you should do to start homeschooling in Pennsylvania. Number one is filing. So filing is what you need to do at the beginning of the school year or when you start homeschooling. So you can pull your child out of school in the middle of the school year and start homeschooling. That is perfectly legal, but you need to file. So these are the things related to filing. You need to file when you begin homeschooling, and after that first year, you need to file by August 1st every year. What you need to file? You need to file your affidavit. So the affidavit must be notarized, and you can use one affidavit for all children in your family, so you don't have to have a separate affidavit for each child. You also need to file your objectives along with the affidavit. And then the health records area is a little bit fuzzy. So the affidavit states that the children are receiving health care, and that should be sufficient evidence because the law talks about evidence of that. But you might want to include a note from your doctor that the records are on file. So Pennsylvania law requires home education programs to submit proof every year that their students are immunized or are exempt from immunization, which means you can file a letter of exemption to say that you have chosen not to immunize or not to give those records to the school based on medical, religious, or moral or ethical reasons. So if you're looking for some of these documents, they are actually available in the description of this. I'm going to have a link to a particular web page that has all of this information and has affidavits that you can download, objectives that you can download, all kinds of things that might be useful to you, as well as links to the law so that you can actually read the law yourself, because that can be really helpful in understanding what you're doing. And the law is not that complicated. I've read it many times. You will be able to understand it if you read the law. So The current practice for parents is to attach immunization paperwork to their homeschool affidavits. That's some parents. Some parents choose to do that. Some parents do not do that. Some file an exemption, and some say, my affidavit is evidence of that. So you have to decide how you want to handle that. So it says here that HSLDA recommends doing this every year. That's not always true. I found that sometimes HSLDA recommends doing it and sometimes they don't. So you might want to check with the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, HSLDA, to see what they're saying, especially if you're a member and if your school district is asking you for immunization records and you feel that your affidavit should be evidence enough that you have those taken care of. So HSLDA will talk with you about those things and help you work through it. And I've listened to the attorneys for Pennsylvania over the years talk about things, and I know that it seems like there's litigation that happens, and so they will change the way they suggest doing things because of that litigation. So that's why I'm saying this might be true, but it might not be exactly the way you need to do things. So I'm sorry I'm not totally clear on this. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense to you. Let's see. So yeah, the last talk that I listened to said if the district wants more evidence besides your affidavit, then you should call HSLDA. So and let's see. So that's the health record information. The other thing I didn't mention that's on this page is when you should file. So if you've decided that you're going to homeschool and you don't send your child to school, at this point in time, you should file by the time your child turns 8. Now, I said at this point in time because some new legislation has just passed in the last few months that the compulsory school age in Pennsylvania, which has always been 8 to 17, has now changed to 6 to 18. And that does have an impact on homeschoolers. So that does not take effect until the 2020-2021 school year. So for the 2019-2020 school year, it's still going to be 8 to 17. But unless something happens to change that, then as of 2020-2021 school year, you're going to need to file for 6-year-olds, not just 8-year-olds and up. So that's something to keep in mind. So there is an exception to that even now. It has been for a number of years true that in the Philadelphia school district, which is the only, I believe it's Class 1 school district in Pennsylvania, that they need to actually report when their children turn 6 years old. So there, they actually have it set up that there's an exemption for homeschoolers. So you have to submit an intent to homeschool letter by the time your child is 6. And then you start actually following the regular homeschool law with the regular filing the affidavit and everything when your child turns 8. And that's kind of the hope as to what will happen now that this compulsory age has changed, that hopefully within the next year there will at least be some new legislation which allows homeschoolers to file a letter of intent instead of actually starting to file the affidavit and everything when your child is 6 instead of 8. So if we can do the letter of intent the way it's been in Philadelphia School District for a number of years now, then that'll make a difference. So I'm not sure if I said exemption or exception, but this is the exception here. So health records. This is just some information that I had gotten from the Homeschool Legal Defense Association that there are some new immunization regulations that have added a requirement for the school district to report immunization data to the Department of Health. And so that's part of the reason that we've seen an increase in school districts asking for immunization records. So this is just a sample of some very general objectives that you can actually use yourself. You can use these same objectives. In fact, like I said, that link that I'm going to give you will have a page where you can find these objectives to download and use them if you want to. So basically, the objectives were set up so that you maybe had a plan of what you're going to do, but they're really not used for anything else. So the superintendent is not allowed to use these objectives to judge your homeschooling. The evaluator doesn't need to see these objectives. And so they're basically kind of a extra thing that you need to do, but they're not particularly important as far as anybody focusing on them and checking up on them. So if you want to make more specific objectives that are useful to you, I encourage you to do that, but you don't necessarily need to turn those into the school district. You can turn general objectives into the school district. So an example of some of these, because I'm sure it's small and you might not be able to read it. So they're divided into elementary, which according to the homeschool law is grades 1 through 6, and secondary, which is grades 7 through 12, according to the homeschool law. For English, in the elementary, we have utilize the library, read a wide variety of books and other types of literature. Continue to improve spelling, grammar, reading, and writing skills. So those are good objectives. They're just kind of general. For secondary English, we have continue to improve spelling, grammar, and composition skills, read a wide variety of literature. So those are the type of objectives that you can create to give the school district. Let's see, for arithmetic in elementary school, we have improve computation skills, master new topics as introduced. And for secondary mathematics, we have improve computation skills, master new topics as introduced. So very similar objectives that way. So we're going to continue here with looking at the end of the year and what you need to do in Pennsylvania. So the end of the school year in Pennsylvania is June 30th. You need to submit the evaluator's letter or the evaluator's form, which will say that sustained progress has been made and certify that an appropriate education is occurring. And those terms come straight from the law. The evaluator needs to interview the child. Again, that's something that's required in the law. When I evaluate, my evaluation as far as my interview with the child involves asking them their favorite subject and their favorite book. Because some kids will just come in and tell me all about everything that they've done. Other kids won't say a word unless I ask them something. So I try to ask something that's very non-threatening. I don't quiz kids on reading or math or anything like that, but I do fulfill the requirement for an interview. And then a review of the portfolio. Your portfolio should contain work samples. So I usually suggest that you have something from the beginning, middle, and end of the year in each subject. If you're doing more of a traditional approach, we've talked about different approaches in the previous video. If you are more of an unschooler, it's fine with me to include whatever you think just shows that you've made sustained progress. So sometimes that's pictures, sometimes I've seen videos. There have been lots of different ways that people show that they're making progress throughout the year. And then test results for grades 3, 5, and 8. So in Pennsylvania, you're required as a homeschooler to test your child in grades 3, 5, and 8. Now that doesn't mean that they have to do a third grade test in third grade. If your child is in third grade, but you feel that they would be better off taking a second grade test, they can take a second grade test. They just need to be tested in grades 3, 5, and 8, and the evaluator needs to see the results of those tests. So I tell people, don't come to your evaluation if you don't have the results of your test. If your child is in third grade, fifth grade, or eighth grade, because I can't give you my evaluation letter, my evaluation form for the district, because I need to see those tests. The test scores do not go to the district. They only go to the evaluator. So the only person that's going to see them would be the evaluator. And I don't keep a copy or anything like that. I just need to look at them. And then you need to have a log of reading materials used, made contemporaneously with instruction, that designates by title the reading material used. I know that sounds a little redundant there even. That comes straight from the law. So in some way you need to have basically a book list telling what you used that year. And I always tell people, include your textbooks on that list as well. You don't have to have every book that your child read that year. A sampling is fine, but you need to have some kind of log to go with your portfolio. So those are the things that you're going to need for your evaluation. You also need to do 180 days. You attest to saying that you're going to do that in your affidavit. So a lot of times people will just have maybe a sheet with the numbers 1 through 180 and they're checked off, or maybe a little calendar where they've checked off the days that they've done, you know, kind of a one-page thing that has all the months on it. Or I'll just ask, did you do your 180 days? Only because on my form I do have a section that says 180 days, 900 hours, or it's 990 hours for secondary. And most people do not keep track of hours. You don't have to do both. You can choose days or hours, and you can decide how long a day is. So as I mentioned in the previous video, a day for your first grader might be 1 or 2 hours. So you decide what a day is, and if it's easier or for some reason better for you to count hours, you can do that instead of counting days. It's totally up to you, and it's up to you to decide what days you count. If your husband is off on Mondays and so you prefer to do homeschool Tuesday through Saturday or something like that, that's fine. You can decide what days you want to do, and you can certainly count weekends when you go on field trips and things like that as days. So I find that it's actually kind of difficult to come up with a day where we didn't learn something. So the 180 days hopefully is not going to be any kind of burden for you. So this is a sample of the evaluation form letter that I use, and basically explains that I have the credentials to do evaluations. I address it to the superintendent of the school district because according to the law, that's the person who's overseeing homeschoolers, even though they often delegate that to somebody else within the school district. I include the student's name in the letter, and I sign it, and I put my my ID that shows that I'm certified on there as well, and my phone number in case they need to contact me. So the Pennsylvania home education law continued. So you need to turn in the evaluator's letter by June 30th. And it's the responsibility of the parents to turn in that form or that letter. And you might want to turn in your affidavit at the same time. A lot of people will turn in their evaluation and then turn in their affidavit and objectives all at once, so they don't have to remember that August 1st date. August 1st feels like it's still kind of the middle of summer, and it's easy to lose track of that. So it's oftentimes a lot easier for people to just turn everything in, and then a lot of times they'll just start counting their days as of July 1st, because the homeschool calendar runs July 1st to June 30th. And then there's the private tutoring option, which I mentioned. If you happen to have a Pennsylvania teaching certificate, you need to get the background checks that you would need if you were teaching. So right now that would be 3 different background checks. And every year you need to, well, every year I did this. They don't always do this. The law is a little fuzzy on this, but it says that you need to assure the school district that you've done what you're supposed to do as a private tutor. So I sent this at the end of the year by June 30th every year, just so that I had fulfilled that part of the law. So, and it's actually part of the code that's mentioned here. This letter is to provide written assurance that the instruction requirements listed in 22 PA Code Chapter 11, 11.31, as amended October 22nd, 2004, have been met for whatever the school year is. And that was all I did. And I signed it, and I had my husband sign it because it was a little confusing in the law as to whether the parent is supposed to sign or whether the tutor is supposed to sign. And so, so I thought, well, he can be the parent, I'll be the tutor, I don't know. But nobody ever questioned it, and it seemed to be just fine. My school district never contacted me, never asked me any questions. So when you're talking about this testing that's required for grades 3, 5, and 8 under the homeschool law, you have some choices. You can do it at home, or you can do group testing. Anyone except for the parents can administer the test. So if you choose to do it at home, you can have a grandparent do it, you can have a neighbor do it, another family member. It's just not the parents who are allowed to administer the test. And sometimes the test itself will kind of dictate who is allowed to administer the test. So there are some tests that require the person who administers the test to have a bachelor's degree or something like that. That's not true for all of them. There are, I believe, 11 tests that are on the list right now. And again, those will be listed on the website that I'll have the link to in the description for this video. So again, you can decide on the appropriate level for the test. You need to have the results for the evaluator. If you need accommodations, you need to contact the test company and find out what the procedure is for getting accommodations for the test, if your child needs someone to read them the test or something like that. So they just want to maintain the credibility of the test, and so they'll have some kind of guidelines for that. There's no score minimum that you need to meet in Pennsylvania, and you can do some kind of test prep. Spectrum has test prep books that you can use. I talked about in the last video that I like the Critical Thinking Company materials. I think that they work well for teaching different subject matter, but they also help prepare for standardized testing as well. Evaluator. So when you're choosing an evaluator, you should find someone who understands all styles of homeschooling, especially in case you change your mind from year to year on what you're going to do. They should be able to provide references from other families. And again, submitting the evaluator's letter is the parent's responsibility, not the evaluator's responsibility. So you should get the letter from the evaluator, and then you get that to your school district. And someone who's an evaluator can evaluate for any school district in the state if they have Pennsylvania teaching certification. There are other ways that you can become an evaluator if you don't have teaching certification, like you can be approved by particular school districts. In that case, you could only evaluate for the school districts that have approved you as an evaluator. So, but if you have Pennsylvania teaching certification, you can evaluate anywhere in the state. You also, to be an evaluator, you also need to have 2 years of teaching experience at the level that you're evaluating. So, but homeschool experience counts for that. And it's actually supposed to be grading experience. So if you were a music teacher or an art teacher, that doesn't necessarily work because the law lists certain subjects that you have to have experience grading in. So anyway, but like I said, homeschooling your own kids would count for that as well. So you probably need to look at the law and decide whether you have the credentials you need to be able to do evaluations. So the supervisor or the spouse cannot evaluate their own child. So if your husband is a teacher, you can't have him do your evaluation. And qualifications for evaluators, we just mentioned. Basically, if you look in the law, it's pretty clear about what you need if you want to be an evaluator. And your evaluator should know that. A few final comments. So the law lists subjects to be covered at the elementary level. That means sometime in grades 1 through 6. and at the secondary level, sometime in grades 7 through 12. So that means that you don't necessarily need to cover every subject in the law every year. So one of the subjects that comes up a lot in question would be Pennsylvania history. When I taught public school and private school, we taught Pennsylvania history for about 6 weeks in 4th grade. So you do not need to teach Pennsylvania history every single year. Although if you live in Pennsylvania, it's pretty hard to avoid Pennsylvania history because it's kind of everywhere. But you don't need to worry about making that a particular subject that you focus on every single year. And hopefully you'll see your child become an independent learner. As time goes on, it's amazing how children grow and learn and develop, and it's exciting. It's scary sometimes because you feel that you are so responsible for their education, but it's also wonderful to see how they grow and what they become. So remember that you can't teach them every piece of information they will ever need to know, but you can teach them to love learning, to be curious, and how to find any piece of information that they want. I remember that. I have that by my desk. It's very helpful to encourage me days when I feel like I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do this. As I said, I'm done homeschooling now. I actually do tutor. I privately tutor, and I tutor for our local dyslexia center. So even now, that can still be encouraging to me. So I hope that you have been encouraged through, if you've watched all 3 through these videos, and I hope that you are excited about getting started homeschooling, and I hope that you're not feeling overwhelmed by the Pennsylvania law, because it really isn't that overwhelming. And even though we are considered to be a state that has a fairly stringent, strict homeschool law, there are lots and lots of homeschoolers here, and they are very successful, and they homeschool in lots of different ways. So you can homeschool in Pennsylvania, and it can be a very enjoyable experience for you and your family. So thank you so much for taking the time to watch. I hope that you will have an amazing homeschool journey.